Balancing encompasses the actions that a particular state or group of states take in order to equalize the odds against more powerful states, that is to make it more difficult and hence less likely for powerful states to exert their military advantage over the weaker ones. The concept of balancing derives from the balance of power theory, one of the most influential theory from the realist school of thought, which assumes that a formation of hegemony in a multi-state system is unattainable, since hegemony is perceived as a threat by other states, causing them to engage in balancing against a potential hegemon. According to the balance of power theory, states, motivated primarily by their desire for survival and security, and will develop and implement military capabilities and hard power mechanisms in order to constrain the most powerful and rising state that can prove a potential threat. Balancing can take two forms, internal and external. Internal balancing refers to the investment of military power to match up with other states. External balancing refers to the alliance of states to counter a stronger power, or a hegemon. In recent years, soft balancing has emerged as a new concept of illustrating how states balance powerful actors, which advocates the use of economic and diplomatic tools to constrain the most powerful state and inhibit their exertion of power and dominance. Balancing behavior of states is prompted by the structural characteristics of the balance of power system itself. This belief is strongly perpetrated by theorists of neorealism or structural realism, namely Kenneth Waltz, who is one of the earliest and most significant contributors to neorealism and balance of power theory. Neorealist theory makes a few assumptions about the system, the interests and motives of the actors within it, and the constraints that all states face, which ultimately lead to behaviors such as balancing. The first assumption is that international order is anarchic, which is a primary cause of the balancing behavior of states. Anarchy, or the lack of an overarching law enforcing body, inevitably forces states to rely on their individual resources and actions to assure their welfare, whereby it becomes a responsibility and a requirement of each state to look out for its own survival and security and show readiness in countering force and aggression from other actors. The second assumption is that the primary goal of all actors is their own survival. At a minimum, they simply strive for their own preservation, while others may have more expansionist motives and seek universal domination. Balancing, hence, becomes a tool by which states use the means available to them to achieve their goals and interests, that is, to protect themselves from a more threatening actor or to further their power and capability. This leads to the notion of self-help, which is labeled the principal action of all actors under the anarchic order. States must rely on their own means and arrangements in order to assure their security. That is, act in their own self-interest in order to avoid falling victim to a more powerful state. This inevitably leads states to behave in ways prescribed by the balance of power. The third assumption is the relative nature of power. The key to security and survival of each state is power, not as an absolute concept, but rather in relations to that of other states, and balancing can often be used as a mechanism of gaining a greater share of power or decreasing the share of power possessed by another state. Balancing can be carried out through internal or external efforts and means. Internal balancing involves efforts to enhance states' power by increasing one's economic resources and military strength in order to be able to rely on independent capabilities in response to a potential hegemon and be able to compete more effectively in the international system. In a self-help, anarchic system, mechanisms of internal balancing are believed to be more reliable and precise than external balancing, since they rest on independent strategies and actions. External balancing involves strengthening and enlarging one's alliances and interstate cooperation in order to prevent a hegemon or counter a rising power, in face of a common threat and a single dominant state with a potential to jeopardize collective security and survival. States are expected to put aside their secondary disputes and join a balancing alliance. External balancing represents an alliance arrangement whereby states join in opposition to a stronger state that is perceived as a source of danger, making this kind of balancing a measure of assuring security through combined opposition to an aggressor or a potential hegemon who can endanger the well-being and survival of smaller powers. In the balance of power system, balancing is opposed to the concept of bandwagoning, whereby smaller states seek to achieve their security by allying with the major power or a dominant actor. As tempting as this option may be for smaller powers, it can essentially undermine the security of the international system because by joining an alliance with a rising, potentially expansionist state, aggression and expansionist motives are being rewarded and accepted. It is in the interest of states to form coalitions with others with similar or lesser power in order to build their defensive and deterrent capabilities, and through this discourage and prevent a growing power from becoming too strong and dominant. After all, as Walt summed it up, states flock to the weaker side, for it is the stronger side that threatens them. States balance in order to avoid being dominated by stronger powers. It is in the interest of states to curb a potential hegemon before it becomes too powerful so that they avoid falling victim to its rule once it achieves a dominant power status. It becomes a safer alternative to either improve one's own capabilities through self-help mechanisms or join alliances with states who cannot readily dominate in order to restrain and curb the one who can potentially dominate the system and undermine the survival of actors within it. Another reason why states in a majority of instances choose to balance and not bandwagon is because joining the balancing alliance allows them to have more influence and play a more important role in that alliance, whereas the alliance with a major power would not allow them opportunities for a great deal of contribution and decisive capability as they would inevitably be dominated by their powerful ally. States prefer to preserve their freedom of action in an alliance rather than have orders imposed on them by aligning with a potential hegemon. If states are extremely vulnerable and insignificant, bandwagoning may be their only choice. However, middle powers and states that have something to contribute and protect will always balance in face of a rising power and a potential hegemon. There are a number of factors that influence the decision of states to balance or bandwagon, as proposed by Stephen Walt in his account on alliance formation. First is aggregate power, which constitutes states' resources and capabilities. This particular factor can provoke balancing, in that a state with high aggregate power is a potential threat and can evoke fears of domination in smaller powers. But it can just as easily lead to bandwagoning as smaller states might be attracted to power and protection from a strong ally. The second factor is proximate power, whereby geographically close states pose a greater threat than distant ones as the ability to project power declines with distance. Once again, an aggressive and increasingly powerful neighboring state is likely to alarm other states to engage in balancing strategies against it. However, small, weak, and vulnerable states neighboring a great power are often prone to balancing due to the lack of viable alternatives, inability to balance independently or contribute to a balancing alliance. Offensive power is the third factor, which conveys that states with large and growing offensive capabilities are likely to provoke others to balance against them. The fourth factor concerns offensive intentions, where perceived aggressive or expansionist goals or motives of a state lead others to balance against it. Traditionally, balancing prevailed in understanding the behavior of states in face of hegemony, as well as in understanding how alliances come together. However, it is tough to dispute the growing trend towards bandwagoning rather than balancing exhibited over the recent decades of United States prevalence. This trend has shown that, whether for purposes of seeking protection or out of fear, states are choosing to ally with the superpower and accept the conditions it inflicts onto the international system. Both internal and external forms of balancing encounter a fair share of obstacles, problems, and criticisms. Internal balancing is subjected to a number of domestic obstacles that can impede its success. High costs associated with it and the difficult task of allocating resources to be able to make significant contributions to one's economic and military development are among the main ones. Furthermore, independently balancing a major power would require major expansion of one's capabilities and accelerated rearmament, which would undoubtedly provoke unfavorable responses from not just the major power in question, but also other states. A state that adopts a strategy of military buildup to increase its security and balance a rising power may inadvertently do the very opposite and create unfavorable conditions for all in the international system. It can inevitably cause a security dilemma, whereby the increase in power and security of one state decreases that of another and offsets offensive actions, potential arms races, and escalating hostility among actors, hindering collective security. External balancing, even though it is a more commonly practiced form of balancing, encounters a variety of obstacles and criticisms. Its success is contingent on an enduring and coherent alliance system. However, given the structural constraints of the international system, this might be difficult to attain and ensure the anarchic nature of the international system together with the state's primary goal of survival intrinsically causes a self-help approach from all states, whereby reliance and trust on other actors are significantly undermined. Alliances do, however, form despite these structural impediments, but they are seen as temporary arrangements that should not be overly relied upon. The international system is subjected to the enduring conditions of insecurity and uncertainty about the intentions and actions of actors within it, which makes cooperation difficult to achieve and maintain. Furthermore, external balancing is caught in the problematique of the game of coordination and a collective action problem, in which it is difficult to sustain long-term cooperation, dedications, and equal contributions to the cause. There are powerful incentives to free-ride on the efforts of others and in this way avoid costs and risks while enjoying the alliance benefits. Since individual actors in the alliance have the same interest and goal in mind, to balance the major, rising power, it should logically follow that everyone in that alliance will act on behalf of the common interest and objective. However, even though there is an expectation to share the costs and efforts of achieving a common goal, alliances and groups demonstrate a tendency towards exploitation and inconsistent dedication and input among participants. Manker-Olson, one of the leading theorists on collective action, identified that despite all the members sharing a common interest, groups, or alliances for this purpose, lack a common interest in paying the costs of achieving a collective benefit, making it problematic to achieve the ends and difficult to